Hi, this is David Voss, CCIE 11372, and in this video you will learn about TCP IP fundamentals. Now you may think this belongs on the CCNA exam, and it does, but you will also be tested on these concepts on the CCNP routing exam as well. In this video you will specifically learn about the different types of headers used on the network, the IP, TCP, and UDP header, as well as how they operate on the network. You will then review how routing works and some of the issues faced or tools used when routing. So let's begin. The TCP/IP stack maps to the network and transport layers of the OSI model. IP, or Internet Protocol, has become the de facto standard for network communications at layer 3. What you see before you is the IP header. You will need to know the functions for each of the fields you see before you. Let me cover some of the functions that you will most likely need to know for your exam and in real-world troubleshooting. First, there's the version field. The version field indicates that it is IPv4 in this instance with a value of 0100. Then there's the type of service field. This field is commonly referred to as the type of service byte. It has 8 bits used to set quality of service markings, and specifically within this field is DSCP. The 6 leftmost bits are used for DSCP, which obviously commonly is associated with quality of service marking. Next is the IP flags field. This is a 3-bit field. The second bit of this field is the DF, or do not fragment bit, and that indicates that a packet should not be fragmented. Then there's the time to live field. This is an 8-bit field that is decremented by 1 each time a packet is routed from one IP network to another. If TTL ever reaches 0, the packet is discarded. The protocol field, which is an 8-bit field, specifies what kind of data, type of data is encapsulated in the packet. TCP and UDP are common protocols identified by this field. Finally, the source address field, which is a 32-bit field indicating the source of the IPv4 packet, and then the destination address field, which again is a 32-bit destination address, which indicates the destination for that packet. Next, let's look at the IPv6 header. First, you have the version field, just like IPv4, but in IPv6, the value is 0110. The traffic class field performs the same function as the type of service field in IPv4 header. The flow label field is used by a router to use a specific outbound connection for a traffic flow if a router has multiple outbound connections. The hop limit field probably sounds familiar. It's the same as the IPv4 TTL field. And then you have your source and destination address field, which is similar to IPv4's header's 32-bit source address field, but in this case, because it's IPv6, it's 128 bits for both, obviously, source and destination. Next, let's move on to the TCP segment header. Here are some of the fields you will certainly need to know. You have the source port field, which is the 16-bit field indicating the sending port number, and the destination port field, again a 16-bit field. So, for example, if you connect to howtonetwork.com, you're connecting to a destination port of 80, which is the TCP port for HTTP. The sequence number field is a 32-bit field indicating the amount of data sent during a TCP session. The sending party uses this field to make sure the receiving party actually received the data. The receiving party uses the sequence number from this field as the basis for the acknowledgement number in the next segment that it sends back to the sender. And then the window field, which is a 16-bit field, it specifies the number of bytes a sender is willing to transmit before receiving an acknowledgement from the receiver. And we're going to follow this up in a few minutes as we talk more about TCP window sizes. Now that you've learned about what is in a TCP header, you need to understand the basics of how TCP initiates traffic flows over a network. It's not complex, but you certainly need to know it if you're tested on it. The process of setting up a TCP session involves a 3-way handshake. Step 1, the session initiator sends a SYN packet or a SYN message to the target host. And then the target host, acknowledges the receipt of that SYN message and sends an ACK or acknowledgement message. And it also sends a SYN message of its own. Finally, the session initiator receives the SYN message from the target, and again, it acknowledges receipt by sending an ACK message, and therefore you have a TCP session established. You need to know each of those steps, 1, 2, and 3, for your exam. Earlier you learned about the window field, so let's circle back and talk about that a little bit. TCP communication uses windowing. One or more segments can be sent at one time. The receiver acknowledges the receipt of all segments in a window with an acknowledgement. Now, TCP can use a sliding window. The window size can begin with one segment, and then if there's a successful acknowledgement of that segment, the window size doubles to 2 segments. And then if those 2 segments are received, the next window can contain 4 segments. This increase in window size continues until the receiver does not acknowledge successful receipt of all segments within a certain time frame, known as the round trip time. The other IP layer 4 transport protocol is UDP. UDP is considered to be an unreliable protocol because it lacks all of the features of TCP. There's no sequence numbering, no window size, no acknowledgements. You can see here the header is quite simple. It contains only source and destination port numbers, and then a UDP checksum, and then segment length. So why use UDP? Well, it's best for servicing applications that need to maximize bandwidth and do not require acknowledgements, such as video streams or audio. And in fact, the primary protocol used to carry voice and video traffic over networks is RTP, Real-Time Transport Protocol. And that's a layer 4 protocol that is encapsulated inside of UDP. Now that you have a good understanding of the individual headers in the TCP IP stack, Cisco wants you to understand how this traffic actually traverses the network. So let's go ahead and use this basic example. We have a PC that wants to send data over to a server. The first step in this process is that the PC will compare its IP address and subnet mask to that of the destination. The PC, by doing this, is aware that the destination IP address is on a remote network and it cannot directly reach it, so the PC understands it needs to send this packet now to its default gateway. It doesn't do that automatically yet. It needs to know actually who the default gateway is. The PC needs to know the layer 2 address of the default gateway, so it sends an ARP request for router 1's MAC address, and then it receives a response. The PC adds router 1's MAC address to its ARP cache, and then now it can send the data in a frame destined for server 1 to the default gateway because it has the matching layer 2 and layer 3 information needed to forward that request or to forward that message onto the gateway. Router 1 then receives the frame sent from the personal computer and looks at the IP header, and remember the TTL field, it decrements that field by 1. Now if the TTL field happened to be 0, which it's not, but if it happened to be 0, the router would discard the frame and then send a time exceeded ICMP message back to the PC. The TTL is not decremented to 0 here, so router 1 checks its routing table and then understands that the best path to reach network 192.168.4.0 is the WAN connection or over serial 1. So it then forwards that message over to router 2. Note that it does not need to do an ARP request because this is a serial interface, and serial interface types do not have MAC addresses. So then router 2 receives the frame, and again it decrements the TTL and the IP header, looks at the IP header, and then determines where is this destination network. The destination network is directly connected off the Ethernet interface. So router 2 needs to understand, now that it has the destination, what the MAC address is for that destination. and it sends out an ARP request, receives the information back, the ARP reply from server 1, and then router 2 forwards the frame out its fast Ethernet interface to server 1. So that's a really basic example, but Cisco wants you to understand all the individual steps and how routing actually works. Now, let's dig even deeper into what's occurring on the network and an important concept that Cisco wants you to know, which is MTU, or Maximum Transmission Unit. An MTU refers to the largest packet size supported on a router interface, and typically 1500 is the common value. Smaller MTU sizes result in more overhead because more packets have to be sent. But if you're sending data over slower speed links, large MTU values could cause delay for latency sensitive traffic. When you have high-speed connections, let me give you an example of, let's say, a private interconnect between two servers. What happens is that administrators often enable jumbo frames. Those are frames over the standard size, or the standard MTU size, so that more data can be forwarded in fewer number of packets, and therefore fewer headers that routers have to process on the network, or systems need to process on the network. Now, if you're going to run a network, you're going to need to troubleshoot it, and ICMP messages are something that you probably are going to be tested on in the CCNP route exam. ICMP is most often associated with the ping utility, and you use that, obviously you've used that in the past to check connectivity. But it has many other roles beyond ping. It uses a variety of message types, as you can see here. But there's two that it appears Cisco wants you to focus on. The first is destination unreachable, which you probably are already aware of. But if a packet enters a router which is destined for an address that the router has no idea how to reach, the router will let the sender know by sending a destination unreachable ICMP message back to the sender. The other message that you may not be aware of is the redirect. A host may have routing information that will help it reach a particular destination network. So it'll send it to that next hop IP address. But network conditions can change, and a different next hop IP address may need to be used. In that case, the original next hop router can let the host know to use a different path by sending a host redirect ICMP message. So you've learned a lot in this video. When you started it, you probably thought it would be a simple review, but surely you've picked up quite a bit of information to help you pass your CCNP route exam. I wish you good luck in your studies.